Hello and welcome to Discover Dorico in January 2025. For reference, I'll be using Dorico 5.1.80, which we've just released today, and is a free update for all those of you with Dorico 5 already. In today's session, we'll be looking at creating the perfect music layout. If you found creating scores and parts a challenge, or are daunted by the options, or don't even know where the options are, then hopefully this session will help. I'll walk you through the process and also suggest an order of items to check or change first so that you can create your layouts quickly and efficiently. I'll be using Dorico Pro because for much of this session you'll need the Pro features to set up and edit things like page templates, but you can then use those templates, of course, in Dorico Elements, SE or Dorico for iPad. We will be monitoring the live chat, so if you have questions or comments related to today's topic, please put them in there. For example, let me know if you can see me, hear me clearly, hopefully. If you don't get your questions answered today, then you can also email on discoverdorico@steinberg.de. If you want to come back and watch this session again, it will always be available on this same URL link. You can pause, rewind, or come back and catch up at any time. After the session, I'll add chapter links so you can skip to specific sections. And don't forget, on YouTube, you can click on the little cog for settings such as display resolution, closed captions, and playback speed, so you can speed me up or slow me down. As well as, of course, use shortcut K to pause, J to go back a few seconds, and L to skip forward. And also, please subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to be notified of other videos and live streams that we do. Let's get started, and we'll start with a similar slide to when we discussed this topic 3 years ago in Dorico 3.5.10. So as I said, I'll be checking the live comments as well here. So hopefully we should all be good. I can see people from all over the place as usual. So thank you for joining us live. And yeah, it's just about big enough. So hopefully if there's any questions that are relevant to today's session, then I'll keep an eye on those as well. I don't know if any members of the team are also watching, so that you may see comments from other people as well. Let's see. To start off with, I'm going to use this option. Now, there's all sorts of things when you're doing a layout that you could potentially change. I wrote down a few as examples. So you could be changing note spacing, or the staff size is a common one, or the paper size, or the casting off, or dragging spacing around, dragging staves around. Don't drag staves around. Number one tip: if you're dragging things around, it ought to be one of the very last things you do. There's probably very little that you're going to drag staves and things around and that kind of thing. So today's session is really about, there's all of these things that you could change, and in what order might you want to change them. So I've put them into a couple of sections here. One is kind of a foundations side and a details side. So if you're doing things like changing the staff size, but you haven't already checked things like the paper size, then you're probably doing things in the wrong order. If you're adding things like, changing note spacing, or the staff and the system spacing, or that kind of thing, but you haven't finished your page template, then again, you might be a bit, you want to think about these things in the right order. And I think if we do that, then this will help you efficiently make the layouts that you want, and stop you doing things on this side which you then end up having to turn off, change, delete, and start again, and that kind of thing. So we'll go through things basically in this order, so you can kind of see where these things are as well. Maybe you don't need to change all of them, and hopefully you don't, but we can look at those and then we can go from there. So we're going to start with kind of foundations of things, and where you want to change those things. I've got a couple of example files of things. Actually, this one I've used before, so you might have seen this one before, because it shows some good cases for particular things and shows some of the concepts very well. And as I said, if there's then questions that you've got afterwards, then maybe we can look at those. I'm also available sometimes to do sessions with people to say, how do I fix this particular layout that I've been working on? But hopefully much of this session will help. I also have 1 or 2 example files at the end, one of which I've been sent in from somebody actually, as kind of, so how do I do this? I've got into this problem, how do I fix this, and what do I do? So we'll look at some of those at the end as well. So, can you all hear me? Probably. Nobody says they can't, so let's carry on. So the first thing we're going to look at is the paper size. So we're kind of going to look, if you like, from the outside in. So a lot of people get lost in the woods or the stems, maybe, and then start dragging things around and that kind of thing. But really, think from the outside in, the outside of the page in towards the middle. So the first thing is going to be, what size paper is this on? And if you're actually, there is a global preference for this as well. So in Dorico preferences, or if you're on a PC, it's in edit preferences, then there's a default paper size, or it says default paper size type, really. It should be on automatic. If it's on automatic, then it will just default to the region you're in. So if you're in America, then you'll get letter size paper and that kind of thing. And if you're elsewhere, you'll get A4 and A3 and that kind of size. Now, if you're living in one area, but working for somebody in a different area, then you might want to change this so you can set it to one of those two options if you want, but automatic is the default. There's also the preferred unit of measurement. Mine is millimeters, but if you prefer a different size, you can change them here, and then the various dialogues that we'll use, like the layout options, they will update as well automatically, so that you then you can see them in the default size you want to work in. But those two are kind of the default preferences. So, excuse me a second. It's coughing and the mic's still active. I apologise. So the now, when you're actually working on a layout, of course, that was just what type of paper you're setting and what type of things you're using. But of course, a lot of the things we're going to be adjusting are probably in the library menu in layout options, and the shortcut for that is Command-Shift-L or Control-Shift-L if you're on a PC. So in here, it will normally default to the page setup when you come in here for the first time. And this is where the paper size for this particular project is. Now be careful when you're in layout options, because I'm using the full score, so this is the full score I've selected from here, then in the layout options it will choose that on the right hand side so that it's showing me the options for the layout that I have open that I'm using. If you have multiple tabs open, or you've left this dialog open because you can on another monitor, just be aware that you need to make sure you're using the right layout on the right hand side. If I choose, for example, the flute layout here, then it will say A4 because my parts are on a different paper size to the full score. The full score is on A3 in my particular case. As I said, you might be using letter, tabloid, one of the other options from here, but that's the one I'm using for this particular project. So it might vary for you. Also, for example, the orientation might vary. This is where you could set if you want landscape, some big band scores and that kind of thing are on landscape. This is where you can set them for a particular layout. So first, set the option that you want in here. Now, I'm going to skip past space size. We'll come back to space size a bit later on. Also, in here, it does tell you which page template it's using. It will probably be using default full score for a lot of the things you're using. If you're on a part, then it will be using the default part layouts, but that's okay. We'll leave those. The next option is the page margins. You can see there's a tiny little graphic here, and on this little graphic, it's showing you the little grey lines around the edge. So I'm in millimeters, of course. So 14.82 is the size of the page margins all the way around the outside, and they're the same for both pages. Now if I just close this dialog for a second, when you're in engrave mode, you can see these little grey lines at the top up here, and now my music frame here and the text frames often meet those edges, those page margins, so you don't really see the grey, for example, down the sides or at the bottom, but they are there. You can see they're kind of just coming out the bottom and out the top here. So that's the page margins. Now you can't go outside the page margins. So that's why it's an important thing to set first, because if you're going to do, for example, a title page that's going to need full width, or you're working on an iPad and you want to reduce the page margins, you want to do that at the beginning, really, before you do any of the other layout things, because how much space is on the page is going to affect everything else and where it sits. So the page margins are in here. Now, if you click on these, you see they're actually the same for A4 and A3 in my particular case. But if you need to change your page margins for any particular thing, do that fairly early on in the process, because that, like I said, that's going to affect everything else. It's certainly going to affect where things sit in your page template that we'll also look at, and that kind of thing. So have a look at page margins first. If you're not sure on the size of paper you want to be using, what the ideal page margins are you want to be using, then there's things like the Mola guidelines, MOLA, orchestral librarians. They have a set of guidelines for various paper sizes for different things. Sometimes that's what is suitable printing in a certain region. They'll also have things when we get to it on staff size. So what's a suitable staff size? So how far away is the musician sitting? Your timpanist is probably further away from his music than your violinist is, for example, or your flute player might be even closer because there might be a 1-to-1, whereas the violinist might be 2 to a page, things like that. So the various different rules or guidelines anyway for what the page margins and staff size and paper size should be. Also the Scoring Notes podcast, they've discussed various options, and I think there's some on the blog as well about kind of different paper sizes for things and what they recommend. And like I said, also if you're using an iPad, then you might want to set some different sizes for particular things for iPad as well. So this is where you'd set up those kind of things. Now the next thing is the music frame margins. So we've got page margins and music frame margins. So the music frame margins only has a top and a bottom, and has a couple of defaults set in here as well. And there's also lots of these little question marks. If you click on that, it will take you to the help page, which tells you more about these items as well in our documentation. So it'll just take you online. So the music frame margin, if I press close, when I'm in engrave mode, if I click on this option here for staff spacing, you can see there's a blue section at the top up here. So I'm not talking about this blue bar, I'm talking about this blue bar at the top of the page. And if I go over here, there's another one here, and at the bottom of the page, there's another little blue section here. So you see there's a green one we'll talk about later over here as well. So this blue area at the bottom is the music frame margin. So the blue frame is a music frame, and it has a margin at the bottom, and we are allowed into that margin a little bit. And there's one at the top, and we are allowed into that. You see, it's the distance between the edge of the music frame and the top of this staff here. So that's the gap that you can set there. For how much space you want. So if you want to reclaim a bit of this space, if you want to get closer to the top of the page and you're wondering why there's a gap up here, especially when you're in one of these other modes in engrave mode and you can't tell, then that's what that gap is, and you adjust it in layout options, and it's the music frame margins here. Now you don't want to make it too small, because as you can see, that's where the staff is, and if you have notes that go outside that, or slurs or text or rehearsal marks or tempos or anything else, then that might be the gap that they would use as well. But that's what that is, so that you're aware of what it is. Now on the first page, there's also a gap at the top often for flows. Now this will depend on your project. So if you are using the hub and you've ticked the this project will use multiple flows, then as well as all the title and other information at the top, and we will look at page templates, you've got this flow header. The reason I'm looking at it now, I've just realised I've made an edit there that I didn't want. So I will show you why we've done that. So this section here that says 1 movement 4, and yes, it's actually movement 1, but anyway, this is taking up space at the top as well, and this is the flow header. So if you have a multiple movement work, or you have flow headers turned on, then it's that extra gap at the top. Don't double click in it and delete whatever's in here. It's got a, it's almost spelt my name there. Don't remove the items that are in here by just deleting them, because the space will still be there. Because in the layout options here for the flows, there is a top and bottom margin. There is some space allocated as well for this flow. So you don't want to do that. What you want to do in here is say never. If you don't want the flow headings, then set that to never, press apply and close. You might want to do it for all layouts. There's a button here to select all, because if you don't want flow headers in the score, you probably don't want them in the parts either. So then you can close that, and then you will reclaim that bit of space at the top of the score as well. Now, in this particular case, I'm going to turn it on so that we can see it. We can kind of edit it as well, because... So I'm going to put that for all flows. And the reason I'm going to do that is so that I can also show you where to edit that if you need to edit things. So this section in here, on the right hand side in engrave mode, so I'm just over here. If I click on flow headings to expand it here, on my screen, I'm just going to have to, I might close that one actually just so we can see the space a little bit. I can double click on the flow headings, and this is the little template area for the flow headings. And you see, normally it says flow number dot flow title, and I also just wanted to tell you that there's other things like the flow number Roman upper. So if you want to display the flow number as Roman numerals, then you can do this. Now you're not going to remember how to type all of these necessarily. So when you're editing this area in the template, if you right click you can add in lots of these items and it will automatically write in the token. That's what it's called, the token that goes in there. So you can make a change to this, you can edit it. That flow number Roman numerals would probably have been at the beginning, really. But you can edit it, put it into here, and then apply it. So if you don't want the flow number and the dot, then you can remove it from here and just have the flow title, for example. But that's where you change it. So I'll apply that and close. And the reason we do that once here for the flow heading is it will now edit it here, and it will edit it for all of the parts. So you've got these options. So in the parts here we have a flow heading. And in here you see there's a flow heading here for the parts, so you can edit for all of the parts and you can edit one for the score, and then you've got your templated areas then set up for exactly what you need. So making minimal changes, one for the score, one for the parts, and you can change those flow headers. So you can see it's actually movement 3, but I was doing a Roman numeral 1 for the flow number. See how it can get confusing. So space wise, you can reclaim the space if you want it, and now you know how to edit it if you need to edit it. Now, the other areas that we've got in the page template here, and even this flow title, the way that you enter the text for these is not by double clicking, because if you double click, you're just going to end up with a project title in here. And if you put something in here, and do an edit like this, then what you're going to end up with is the original text and something in here, and you're going to end up on the right hand side over here with a red triangle. And the red triangle is an override. It's showing you that something manual has happened at this point, and generally I'm going to try and avoid all the red stuff. I'm going to try and avoid red triangles up here. I'm going to try and avoid red systems that have been dragged and that kind of thing. I'm going to try and make it as much as possible automated and show you where the automated for options are, because that's going to be the most efficient way of laying things out and doing things. So I'm not, occasionally you need to make a small edit, but in this case I'm going to choose this page, right click and remove all the page overrides. I don't think there's any others anyway, and it's going to put this back to the default. So to enter these bits of text in here, go to the file menu and go to project info, or Apple I, or I think it's Control I on Windows. Yes, the dreaded override, as somebody just said. Hi, Daniel. So in here we've got the project details and we have the flow details. So the project details contains the project title and the composer, and there's also a lyricist option which is in our template by default over here. Now these are the only 3 ones at the top that are the defaults. There's also one at the bottom that's a default, which is the copyright information, which would use this field here. But there are lots of other fields that you can potentially use, but they're not used on a template by default. So you can fill in all of the information in here if you want to for the project, and if you've got specific information for a particular flow. So this one does, it's got a particular flow title. Maybe I don't want the number 1, that's okay. I've just told you how we can get rid of that in the flow title little template, the flow headings template. So you can enter all the information that you need into here, but then to get it to display on the page, you need to make sure that you've used a token that references that information somewhere. And that could be the score and the parts, or one or the other. So what you do is on the right hand side down here, you have page templates. When you choose a page up here, you see it's telling you which template it's using. So all of the other pages are using default, and the first page is using the first page template. So if I double click on this page template, this is where the default information is and where the tokens are. So the project title will be displayed here, the project composer over here, the project lyricist if there is one over here, and then at the bottom the project copyright. So that's kind of a basic default template. If you wanted to put in a dedication, a subtitle or something else, you can add that up here. So you could, for example, choose a text box and you could add in another box in here, for example. You can then double click in it to get the editor. You can right click and just choose one of the options from here. So for example, subtitle would be very easy because you can just choose subtitle. And then for any of the text in here, you can then, I recommend using a paragraph style. So if you haven't set up a paragraph style for things, then I would, because in here there is a bunch of options that you can set. So things we use like composer, copyright, flow title, they already have one. But if you can set up all of your own. So if you have your own dedication line, which is a particular font, a particular size, and italics, for example, you could set that up. To set up your own paragraph styles, you do that in library paragraph styles, and you can do that at any point in this dialog. Press this little plus button, set up a paragraph style, whatever you need. If you want it to be available in new projects as well, click the little star icon and then it will also be available in your new projects. And then when you double click in here and choose your text, it will then be available in this drop down to choose a paragraph style so that you can choose the particular things you need. Don't do this, which is to set manual sizes and and this kind of thing, because you've only set that once in this template, and really you want to create things. If we're doing things efficiently, you want to create things that you can then reuse. So when you decide in the future that actually all the project subtitles should be a little bit smaller, you have to come into here to edit them, whereas really what you want to do is just go to the paragraph styles and tweak it in the paragraph styles, and it will change everywhere where you use that style. So this would work, at least to show another bit of information from the project info dialog if you needed it. Also be aware of the sizes of these boxes. If you haven't made the box big enough, so by which I mean you can drag the bottom handle here, you can drag the edge handles here. You can also use things like the arrow keys to select an item. You can use Alt or Option up and down to just tweak the box a little bit. You can use Command Option or Control Alt on PC, and you can make larger jumps of size in these boxes. But you set the size of the box for the information that you would want in it. If you don't, then you're going to find that your text gets cut off somewhere. And I've seen some files from people where they've added loads of information for the composer, for example, but then it doesn't fit in the box. So in here, double click on the page template. This is where you can make the box bigger so that the items fit. You'll also find in the properties panel at the bottom, there's some things like vertical alignment. So at the moment, this text is being centered in the box. But if you wanted it, for example, to be set to the bottom and aligned with the bottom of the box, then you could do that, or the top, or anything else. There's padding options, there's border options in here as well, and various things. And you can also set the size. So really for this one, you probably don't really want to constrain it to the bottom of the page, but you probably do want to set maybe top and left and right. So you can kind of set the constraints, and these will be important if you were to resize the page. So if this was suddenly to become A4 instead of A3, these kind of constraints would make a difference. I'm not going to go into too much detail on those today. We have done it in a couple of other sessions. In fact, I think there was one on creating a title page that we did that, or we can do another session on those kind of things in the future. But the idea is that these areas you would need to create either as a new text box or inside one of the text frames that are already here, so that you've got an area for those tokens that you need. Actually, just before I delete that, sorry. Also, there's these copy options, because I'm editing the left page here, but really the right-hand page is normally the one that's actually used as the first page. That's normally page 1 is a right-hand page. So if you have exactly the same options between the two, you can just press this button. It will copy the information from this page to this page before you press apply, and then you've then got your template set up. However, if you've got page numbers in outside edges of pages, you don't want to use these options, because you'll end up with all your page numbers either on the left or all of them on the right. So you might want to edit these two pages independently, especially when you're doing the default page layout and editing those. But that's how you can basically edit the page template to get what you need for that one. I'm going to delete those two because I don't actually want those areas in this one. Apply and close this template so that it's going to use it. Much of this session now, I think, is really going to be on kind of the content on the page and how do you get the systems in the places you want them, at the size you want them, and everything else. But I just wanted to make sure initially we've looked at the paper size, the page margins, the music frame margins, how you get the music frames on there, the text items that are around the edges, those kind of things, the copyright details, which I don't have, but you could. Like I said, don't forget to make the box big enough to make those fit and make it big enough in the template. But now we know kind of those areas, then I think that's a good start. Also, I'm not really today going to look at things like the other paragraph style options. So if you want a particular different font, a particular different style, size, or anything like that, then I'm not going to cover those kind of things in this session. If that's of interest, then please get in touch. Maybe we'll do that in another session or a Zoom session with you. We also have some other videos online already, so I might direct you to some of those as well. But that's not where I'm going to go with this session, if that's okay. There's a quick question about markdown formatting, so I'll just say that there is an option down here for resolve markdown formatting for text tokens. So if you want to use a little bit of bold or italics or that kind of thing, then you can do that in here as well. And yes, as Frank's just said, you can find info on markdown on the internet, but yes, it is also mentioned in the manual, and I think Daniel's just put a link to that as well. So if you want that, then let us know. And if, like I said, if you can't find it, actually, Markdown format is not just us; it's all over the place. So if you want to look at Markdown format for bold and italic, there's lots of places online that can do that. Or get in touch on our Facebook page, and we can point you in the right direction. So the other information on the page: how do we get this to be the right size on the right page, and looking correct? So for example, where the staves are sitting on the page, why have we got a big gap in the middle, all these kind of things is the kind of things we want to look at now. So I'll take a few other things that I think are maybe a little bit more, before you kind of start worrying about some of the others, are going to kind of make a fundamental difference. So they're kind of in our foundations list. The first is a really daft one, but I have seen this before, and I'm just going to move out of the way, is that down here in the bottom left-hand corner, by default, Dorico scores are in concert pitch, and there is a transposed pitch option. Now, it's not going to make any difference to this score because we've got flute and strings and cello, and harpsichord. But for a lot of projects, make sure you've chosen transposed pitch, or if you need it, you've got transposed pitch turned on, because that will make a difference to the spacing of things. Because if you've got any music where it's falling out of the staff slightly, it might be because it's a transposing instrument. So make sure you've set that option first. You should find in Dorico that the defaults are for scores to be in concert pitch and for parts to be transposed automatically. You can change it in layout options if you need to, so if you want to set your own defaults, then you can do that, but just make sure you've set the right one first. The next is things like the staff names over here. So the gap that we have on the left-hand side here is going to affect how the music is spaced on this page. And in a score, it's also going to affect the size of these gaps here. And that's going to affect how much music you can get on the page. So initially, it's worth having a look at these and making sure you've got the labels correct. If you haven't looked at these yet and you're worrying about how many bars there are on a page, then it's the wrong way around. So initially, in our layout options, again, in Staves and Systems, there are options here for the full score, or for any of the parts, but for the full score, we're going to look for the staff labels on the first system are full, and the staff labels on subsequent systems are abbreviated. So that's the standard, and when you choose a part, you can see they're both set to none, so they're not turned on. So this is probably what you want. However, there's also down here things for show player group names. So if you wanted to group the strings together, for example, then you can have a bracket around them and those kind of things. And if you want those turned on, if you're using the player names instead of the staff names, maybe. There's also the pitch and transposition, and this can affect the size of the names over here. So if it's a trumpet in B flat or a B flat trumpet, it will be a different size of the text. So you can choose, do you want to show the instrument pitch or transposition, and do you want that to be at the start, so B flat trumpet, or end trumpet in B flat? So these options, and whether or not they're shown in parentheses and on separate lines and that kind of thing, these are all in here for this particular layout. Now, for most cases, they don't apply to the parts, as I said, because we've got those turned off. But if you want to override some of these or change the names, so for in here, for example, in setup mode, you can see I've got flute, violin, violin 2, violoncello, contrabass, harpsichord, but these are not the labels that are shown here. So when you expand one of these players, you can then come into here and do change instrument or edit names. Now, I don't need to change any instruments this time or move players or anything else. I just need to edit names. And if you want to manually write in or change, or for example, even put on 2 lines, if I put this on 2 lines in here, then it will, you see now the music's slightly close to the edge of the page because this isn't the shortest name anymore. The longest name anymore. These are the longest names. So these kind of changes are going to make a difference to how much music you can get on the page. So that's the option I had by default. So I'll put that back. So you can do that. Also in the edit names dialog, there's an option for show transposition. Do you want to follow the layout options, which most instruments will? Or do you want to always show the transposition for this instrument or never? So this is an override for the layout options. So start with the layout options because that will make everybody consistent. But if you've got one that you need to override it, you can do it in here if you need to. Now be careful, if you tick save as default for instrument, you'll then get these options always for that instrument. So if you make a change on your computer, you'll always get those. So just be careful if you tick that box, then be aware what you're doing. So that's kind of the initial gaps. Now also in the parts, while you don't have any labels here, because the label is up here instead, and if you're interested, this is part of the page template. So the first page template for parts has a layout name up here as well. The layout name is the one that is on the right over here. These are the layouts, so this is the layout name. So if you want to change it, you can right click and rename and you can change it here. So that's why we have a harpsichord part, but it doesn't say harpsichord on the score because this is using the staff name from over here, from the instrument that's listed here, and the layout is using these layout names over here. So we don't have instrument names here because we don't need them, but we do have this initial gap which some people like and some people don't. Again, it's in layout options, Command-Shift-L, and in here when you go to Staves and Systems, this is where all the labels were for everything else, but also if you scroll down, there's an indent first system of flow by 6 spaces. So if you don't want that for all of your parts, you can choose this option here, which is the little music stand, to select all the parts, and you can change this to 0 and it will remove that option there if you don't want it. Or if you want it bigger or you want it smaller, that's where you can change it. I won't do that one because I want to keep this as it is, but I wanted to show you where it was. Important thing is don't just delete the labels and change things there. Turn them on and off in layout options because it'll make a lot more sense to do it that way. Another option really for the score is you're going to lay things out and decide, how many bars there are on each system and all these kind of things and where they're going to sit. But firstly, you probably ought to decide, do you want to hide empty staves? So when you have instruments that aren't playing, what type of score is this? So again, it's in layout options. So it's in the library menu, layout options. I'm using the shortcut Command-Shift-L or Control-Shift-L on PC. And at the bottom of this section, or you click on staff visibility, you can decide hide empty staves. Is it on? Is it never on? Or is it on after the first system? So if I do it on all the time, for the score, of course, then it's going to do this. So it's only going to show me staves that have music in them. If it's going to do after the first system, so the first system will show me all of the people who could possibly play, even if they're empty, and then the other ones will all be hidden. Or do you want this set to never? So it's never going to hide the empty staves. And I'm going to set it to never in this particular case for a consistent layout across this one. Now this is going to make a massive difference to how many pages you've got, where your page turns are and everything else. And you're setting this for each individual layout. Maybe if you're, I don't know, if you've got a part for percussion, for example, with multiple instruments in it, maybe you want to hide the empty staves when they're not playing, for example. But normally you're doing this kind of thing for the score. There's also some options to allow individual staves and multi-staff. So things like, it could be percussion, but things like a grand staff of a piano or a harpsichord. If you want those to be able to be hidden, then you can tick the box. I think pop rock charts would do that, really. PVG as well. They might hide part of a piano staff if they're not using it. You can also exclude particular players. So if there's some instruments you always want to show, tick the box. You can hide all or after first system, but tick the box and that instrument will always be shown. So that will make a big difference to layout type things. Another thing that will make quite a difference is in the Staves and Systems section is casting off. Now casting off is more commonly probably a jazz style or a film score style where they have a fixed number of bars per system. So if I put this to 4, I'll just move this for a second. So at the moment we're going 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We've got 8 in this one. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is Dorico doing its default spacing, and we'll get to that bit. But if you want to set a particular fixed number of bars per system, you can set this to a number. 4 is the default. Press apply, and this layout will only ever get 4. Now you can manually override things if you want to, so you can manually decide you now need to occasionally move a bar between pages and that kind of thing. We will get to that. But this casting off option is just something you can turn on, and it will make everything work. And I guess in a jazz chart, if everything's basically 8 bar, 16 bar blocks, that kind of thing, it can make sense, and that will often also put things like rehearsal marks at the beginning of the line, that kind of thing. So that can be quite a useful option, and it means you don't have to go through and set it manually yourself. You just go to Layout Options, Staves and Systems, Casting Off. It's called Casting Off because it's a term from originally publishing books and working out the layout of things before they start, basically. I think if you click this little help icon, it might tell you more about that. But anyway, that's why it's called casting off. You can also set things like a fixed number of systems per frame if you needed it. So there are those kind of things you can set. If you're using open bars as well, whether or not you're allowing them to be split across system breaks is another option that's also in casting off. So I'm going to untick that because I don't want that in this particular case because it's making the music too spaced out, and I'm going to let Dorico do its automatic spacing across this particular one. One more option that I think is maybe actually sort of in my foundations list is for parts. So when you're looking at particular parts, this one actually isn't going to make any particular difference to this particular part, but for most parts, and I'll show you an example later that somebody sent me where this will make a big difference. So when you're looking at the spacing between all of these systems, these are all quite consistent. In fact, if you turn on this option here, which is the staff spacing tool, and zoom in on the left hand side, oh, there we go, then you can see we're getting quite consistent numbers between all of these. So that's because this one doesn't have any dynamics, it doesn't really have any extra tempos above, the notes aren't going massively out of range. It's almost like Bach knew what he was doing for this instrument, and so that's what he's done. We have got slightly different ones on this page, but again, they're consistent numbers, so they're consistently spaced out. Now, if you've got things like a rehearsal mark and some text and various other things, you may find that you get different gaps between various various systems on this page for various instruments and their part. So what I would do is go to Layout Options and select all of the parts, and I would consider, and understand what you've done, but consider this option, which is automatically resolve collisions between adjacent staves and systems. It's ticked by default. Now, in this particular case, it's not going to make any difference. If I tick this, it's going to make very little difference. But what it's actually doing is resolving collisions. For example, in a score, when you've got a dynamic in one part and another instrument is getting a bit higher underneath, it will automatically add some space just to make sure that it doesn't collide. If you've got things between systems here, it will also add some space here, a little bit more space. So if you've got a tempo at the top of one system and some notes lower on the other one, it will also add some space there just to make that happen. Now, this left-hand side, of course, doesn't happen in parts unless you've got more than one staff, but this right-hand side could potentially. If you've got notes that are going low on one staff and high on another, it will move them apart. If you've got a rehearsal mark and some text and it needs to make some space, it will move those apart. And actually, I would say often you can turn that one off, and then you can manually fix any of the problems that might come up. And I will show you more details of that a bit later on. But I just wanted to say it's kind of in my kind of, foundations list, the first list of things you probably want to look at first before you then kind of decide where your page breaks and various other things are. So now we get into some details of things. So we're now looking into kind of what was my right-hand column in my list earlier on of kind of the details of things that you might want to change. Sometimes there'll be little manual things. Sometimes, again, you want to really make these changes, as few changes as possible to get a good layout consistently. So we'll look at some of those. There's a quick question. Does the collision detection only work in page view or also galley view? It only works in page view. However, if you're getting collisions in galley view, then in this section again in layout options, so you're probably, I'm guessing, working on the score at this point because the parts wouldn't happen. But if you are working in the score, it won't happen in this one because it's, again, consistent layout. In write mode, for example, if you're working in galley view, you can choose it down here or you can use the shortcut for it. So you're working in this long consistent view. You might get some collisions here because we're not doing all of the same spacing options. So in the layout options, in vertical spacing, there's an option just here in galley view, expand the ideal staff gaps to 125%. I often put that on 175% or potentially a little bit more, and that will then increase the gaps between all of the staves so that you don't get collisions between them. Because maybe if you've got lyrics in there and other things happening and somebody else is a bit high at that point off the staff, or slurs, you can get collisions with some of those things. So maybe you want to increase this, which is only for galley view, and it will just expand those gaps slightly. When you're back in page view, all of the other normal spacing things apply. Yes, Ron has just said yes. Lyrics it covered up by high notes. There you go. So that's the option you want to choose there, I think. Of course, you can also use instrument filters. So up here, you've got an instrument filter option, and you can use these instrument filters. Which I won't cover right now, but if you Google the instrument filters, you could turn off some of the instruments you're not using right now, or change or effectively create a little layout of the instruments you're working in which doesn't contain the lyrics, for example. It's just another option. So now we're going to have a look at things like, so what the staff size. So importantly, we already know in layout options in our page setup, we already know that the score is using A3 paper. Hooray! And then you can look at the staff size. So how big is the staff here? Annoyingly, it says space size here, and it doesn't say staff size, but this is what you will probably know from other software as staff size. Now, Dorico isn't going to change this automatically to make things fit on the page, because to be honest, that's horrible. If Dorico was constantly changing the music to fit on a page, then you'd never really know what size the staff is and whether it's a printable size or anything else. What you really want to do is set the appropriate size here, and maybe tweak it occasionally if you need to. So the default size of a staff in Dorico normally is 7mm, and it's called a rastral size. Now, I know some people said, why is it called a rastral size? In our help documentation here for staff size, which if you click on the little button you'd get to, in here it says staff size, and it tells you various details. But it also tells you that this is the rastral size of the full staff. So it's the gap, basically, number one here. It's the whole section here. That's the size we're talking about. And the reason, rastral size, the reason it's called a rastral size is that they used a rastrum, which is basically, on Wikipedia, a rastrum is one of these tools which could draw 5 lines all at the right size. So that would, just for a single staff, draw the size, and it would be 7mm from this side to this side. I'm sure they didn't use millimeters initially. What they used was they had specific sizes, 0 to 8, of those rastrums that they were using when they were drawing it. So that's where this information's come from. Apologies for the dog. And the rastrum, in fact, it's Wikipedia's birthday today. Happy birthday, Wikipedia. It's 24 today. Yes. So 2001 they started. So this is why it's called a rastral size. I just thought, you might like to know. So you can choose a specific size, but probably more importantly is the size, in my case in millimeters, of what this is. So it says it's a 17mm staff, and a space size is 1.75 millimeters. So that's this bit, the little arrows are pointing to. The size between these two gaps here is 1.75mm. Now, this is important because we'll use this again in a second. Also, there's lots of things in Dorico that are calculated in spaces. So they're calculated relative to the size of the staff you're using. So when we look at the gaps between these staves and between systems, they're calculated in spaces. So they're multiples of 1.75. Nope, definitely not as in harmonic dog. So that's where you can set a space size. So if you want a slightly smaller staff, you can choose this in here, you can press apply, and the staves will change. And that will change, of course, not only where things sit on the page, but the size of lots of other things that scale accordingly. If you made this slightly bigger, in fact, let's go slightly bigger again, then you would probably need more pages because all of the music would be slightly bigger. So this is the kind of thing that, again, as I said earlier on, Mola have guidelines, various other people have guidelines. Maybe you're working with a publisher who has guidelines on what sizes they want, and Dorico has some defaults in here as well, and you can set this for the score and the parts. If you want to make little changes to things, this is setting it globally for this entire layout. So let's say from this page, for some reason, we want to make it slightly different from this page onwards. if you go to engrave mode and you set a system break or a frame break, actually, there's a little signpost here, and then at the very bottom of the screen, you with that selected, you open the properties panel. You can set a space size, and you said I said 1.75 was important, so because that's the space size you're setting. So if you make this a little bit smaller, 1.26 for example, the staves are now a different size from this page to this page, and maybe when you get to this page you want them to go back again. So if you set another system break at this point, you can then say that the space size goes back, for example, to 1.75 again. So you can set a different staff size if you just need to squeeze a little bit more onto one page. That's potentially a way of doing it. I'm not going to do that in this case, but I just wanted to show you the option. So I'm going to delete that system break, and I'm going to click on that system break and press delete and delete that one as well. Now another thing you might want to do with staff size is one instrument might want to be a different size all the way through the layout. So commonly, if you've got a soloist and piano, then maybe in the piano part you've got the solo written, but it's a smaller staff because it's a reference. Or if you've got a choral part, you've got the choral music and the piano staff is in there as well, and maybe the piano staff is slightly smaller because you're being mean to your pianist. I mean, because it's the choral part and they don't need the piano part most of the time. So if you choose an item on the staff here, you can right click and you can go to staff size and change this, for example, to 60%. So now this flute staff is now 60% size all the way through the score. It's not changing any of the other instruments, it's just that one particular instrument. So it's a completely different case on somewhere where you might want to set the staff size. And if you want to turn it back again, you can choose staff size and go back to 100%. So just choose an item on the staff so it knows which one you're using, and then right click and choose those options. Now, the next option I think we want to probably look at is things like note spacing. So the staff size obviously is going to affect how much music fits on the page, but also the note spacing is going to affect things. So let's have a look, for example, in a part. So if I choose this option here, then this is going to show me manual note spacing, but really you want to do things globally. So let's do it in layout options, and we'll choose note spacing. So for the flute part, because I switched to the flute part, I'm on the flute part here, it now says the default space for a crotchet or a quarter note is 4 spaces. So here in this little graphic here, it says I don't know if you can quite make it out, it's quite small. There's a little 4. If you're on your own computer, just get closer, zoom in. So it says 4 here, so that's 4 spaces between this quarter note and this 8th note. And then this one is 2.84 spaces between this one, and 2 spaces between this one and this one, and then it goes down to 1.6, which I believe is 1 3/4 spaces. And then for longer notes, like half notes and bigger, then they will be 5.67. So they've got proportional kind of spacing. If you want to set things in a custom spacing ratio, you can also do that here. But let's say we just want to make things a little bit tighter. It's Keycaster, Origin 17. So the default space, if I make this, actually let's make this really small comparatively, so it's, well, 3. So if I put this to 3, in fact I'm going to do this while you can see the notes are a bit tighter now. If I make it even tighter, you don't want it to go this far generally. You see it's getting even tighter. So now this may also depend on the font you're using. Haven't really talked about fonts, but if you're using a different music font, if you've gone to library music fonts and you've chosen one of the other music fonts, some of them may be slightly narrower fonts. So maybe you want to also make slightly narrower note spacing or the opposite. So this is where you can make things look more cramped. Be careful. I'll put this back to 4. We'll have a look at the Dorico defaults again. Here we go. So Dorico is designed to lay the music out nicely using these options, but if you need to change them en masse for this part, or if you chose all of the parts, or all the score and everything, you could change the note spacing, and this will really change how much music fits on each page, and therefore how many pages. So if you're trying to make, for example, page 5, and you only really want 4 pages of the flute part, you could go to note spacing in the layout options, and you could change this. Let's just drop it down to 3.5. Oh, all but one system. We could probably squeeze that on manually, but let's just do a little change, 3 3/8. There we go. So now all of this music fits on 4 pages instead. I've not changed the staff size, I've not changed the spacing of the page margins or anything else. I've just changed the gaps between the notes very slightly so that everything is a little bit tighter, and now the music fits on more pages. So that's an option that you could potentially use. It's only on this one part at the moment, but you could apply that to other parts as well. So I'm going to put this back to 4 so you can see again the spacing changes and how they happen. Now it also may be that you've got one particular passage that's more complicated, that you want a bit more space, or you've got a passage which is simpler and you actually don't need as much space. You can also use the engraving options note spacing change, and you can apply a note spacing change from the selected item. So if I say from this point on I want to change this to 3 1/8, then it will do a note spacing change from that point on. And then maybe here I want to put a note spacing change and go back to the default 4 or whatever. So you can go back and say note spacing change, and you can just do a reset and it will reset it back to the defaults. So I'll press cancel. So you can do those. If you don't want this change again, you can choose the little signpost, just press delete and it goes away. Dorico lays the music out again as it previously did. So those note spacing changes are potentially an option as well. There's also, you can make manual note spacing changes. So I'll show you those in another little example. So I've got one here. Here we go. Now this one is an example from the Bach Riemenschneider. So it originally looked like this. This is a graphic, in case you're wondering. I've imported a graphic of the page of music from the book. So it's lots of examples of Bach chorales. And this is incredibly tight note spacing. So you could, potentially, you could say, set a really tight note spacing to make this work. And I've done a couple of versions, actually. I've done a piano and a piano chunky. I don't remember when I set those names, but I'm starting to regret it now. Anyway, so this one, piano, if I go to the layout options and I go to note spacing, is using 3 3/4 spaces for piano. Piano chunky is using 3 1/2, so they're very slightly different note spacing between the two. Piano, the one we're using at the moment, you can then also, if you need to, if you've still not quite got the changes you need, because if you make everything really tight, you might get little collisions you need to fix. You can go over here to the note spacing rules, note spacing tool, and this is the manual note spacing tool, where you can change a particular beat or a particular note inside that beat and move it. So this one, I haven't changed the whole beat, I've actually only moved the little sharp here, the little D sharp, because the sharp symbol was clashing with the previous note. So if I just press delete, you can see here, oh, let me just turn off my, I'm using just the tick back shortcut just to hide all of the other options for a minute, but I'm holding the key down while I'm showing it to you, so that's why it keeps repeating the same shortcut. So this little sharp is clashing here, and this little sharp was clashing with this one, and this little sharp was clashing with this one. So I've just adjusted, actually this one was fine, but these ones are 8th notes. I've just adjusted that manually. So I've chosen this box here. I then press tab, or you can click on the little circle, and I'm using the Alt or Option key just to move that to the right, just to give myself a tiny little bit of space there so that that note also fits. And that's the kind of spacing you can do if you want to. I then made it slightly worse for myself. I went to piano chunky. So in piano chunky, I made everything even tighter spacing. But then I also made the staves slightly bigger. That's why they're chunkier. So all the notes and staves are slightly bigger, but it's tighter, and therefore I had to do more manual adjusting of things. So I had to use this tool a bit more. So these are all the red items that you can see. And if you don't want one, you just click on the box, press delete, and it goes away. But now you can see the spacing is really tight, but I've had to manually adjust all sorts of things to make it so that I could make something that was very similar. So all of the spacing on here, all of the bars are in exactly the same place, all of the notes are in exactly the same place, and that's how you can get that really tight spacing. But it's a very manual process at that point, because you are specifically, it's like a hand engraver, you're really forcing the spacing down, and so you might have to make little changes occasionally to do those kind of things. Anyway, so oh yes, sorry, question off topic. The mouse tool is mouse posy, and the tool I was using for the keyboard shortcuts is keycaster with a K. So note spacing, you've got the global options that most of the time you want to use, but if you really want to get nerdy, then you can use those options as well to get really nerdy with your individual note spacing should you want it. Now, let's look to some more slightly more common things, I think, for what you want to do. So the first is things like page turns. So Dorico, unfortunately, doesn't yet do page turns for you. You're going to have to figure out where you want to put your page turns. So there's no point in doing your page turns until you've decided what size your staves are and what the note spacing is, because the note spacing is going to affect everything else. So if you're using smaller note spacing here, that's going to affect where items appear and therefore where your page turns are going to be. So that's why the order of these things, I think, is quite important as to, you know, which ones you want to look at first. And I would commonly do note spacing and just shrink it slightly, because that's going to probably affect things like, you know, system breaks and page breaks and how many pages you're using first. But let's say we're adding some manual page breaks now as to where things are going to be. So you can choose an item. Should we have a different part this time? Oh, I've already done some down here. That's no good. Let's delete those ones. And then maybe set some manual options down here. Let's delete that one, and not that one, not the slur. Let's delete that one. I'm just choosing a couple of system breaks that have obviously been added before. Let's make a mess of this one. So let's say we want to move some of these things around manually and say, actually, I need to force some of these things. So for whatever reason, this bar, this note, wants to be on the next system. So you can do that by using these buttons up here, move to next system. So I've chosen an item here, and I can click on this button here, which is move to next system. So it does that, and it adds in a system break. So it's saying, you know, it's added a system break here and one here. It's moved this to the next system. Let's say this note here wants to be on the previous system. So I can choose this one here, and I could do move to previous system. So now it's done that one. So what we have now is a few little system breaks have been added. And also we've got some different numbers and some different colours at the end here. Also, these move to previous and move to next system, they have shortcuts which are on a UK-US keyboard. It's the greater than, less than symbols, which are actually on the comma and full stop, period. So comma is move to previous system. And I'm doing that the wrong way, aren't I, on the video? That's right. Oh, I'm the wrong way around. Sorry. Move to previous is comma, because it's the key on the left, and period is the key on the right, so it's move to next. So that's these two buttons here. Move to previous is comma, move to next is full stop or period. So it's adding these system breaks in, and now we've got these numbers. So these numbers are saying that this system here, all the way along this system here, is using 99.3% of the available spaces. So spaces is the note spacing rule and how many spaces it's allowed, etc., etc. There are 95.6 spaces, and it's used 94.9 of them. This one is only 90.4% full, probably because some of these half notes at the end, maybe because there's some of the rests as well, so it's not as full. This one that I've just forced an extra bar onto is overly full. If you want to look at some of these as well in here, then when you're changing some of these items, there's a fullness indicator at the end. Green is good. There's also a pinky purple one here, if I just zoom in here. So the final system. So if it's been justified, so when I did the casting off earlier and I forced things to be particular in particular areas, then you get these pinky purple ones as well. But I've got a red one now, which is you're now over full. Now it's okay. You know, it's the kind of thing you might want to check to make sure you don't have any collisions now, because Dorico is just highlighting it to you. It's not going to stop you, it's just highlighting it to you. And then it moves on and it's okay after that. So now you have a good idea of when something's full. Do I need to make any changes, you know, and check things? However, be careful with these system breaks, because if you've added system breaks, there is a little option that says wait for next system break, and some people know what I'm about to say. So if I now decide I don't want these system breaks, I'm going to press delete. I get this. Now, this is because this system break says it's waiting for the next system break, and there isn't one anymore because I just deleted it. So all you do if you get this, and it can happen on an entire page or one system, just find this system break and press delete. And then this system break and press delete. If you want to, you can select all. You can filter the system breaks. So you can go in here, filter, and there's an option in here for filtering all the breaks if you want it to, and you could filter those out and say actually delete them all, or just, like I said, just choose one of them. Also, I've tended to, if you've watched any of my previous sessions, when I've got things like these signposts, I've tended to make a shortcut which removes them. It just hides them. It's the view signposts. So if you've watched any of my previous sessions and you've got a shortcut and you do that, then you can run into these problems as well, potentially, because when you've deleted one of them and not realised and then turned off your system breaks, you can't see them. So make sure you turn them on, and then you can delete the system breaks and everything's back as normal. So now this is the default layout again, all the green numbers down the left-hand side. You can also do things like, say, this bar to this note. So, for example, from here to here. So I've chosen that one and I've Command or Control selected this one. You can say make into system. So now it's specifically the range of notes I've selected, it's force those into a system. That's another option. I'm just going to press undo. There's also make into frame. So if you want to force a page break effectively for a page turn, let's say it's going to be here at the end of this 13 bar. Actually, no, let's do it at the end of this bar here. So we have a single bar. Or maybe this one's even better. Well, whichever one you want to choose, we'll do create frame break. So it's now added a frame break there, which is the wrong place, because you actually wanted it there. So be careful what you click on. See what I clicked on there? That's not where you want your frame break. You want it here, or you can choose the bar line, I suppose. And you can also do Shift F, and you can make a frame break, so that now Dorico will lay this page out like this, and then you've got one bar to do a page turn, and then you've got your frame break over here, and it will carry on. So effectively a frame break is, I suppose in other software, a page break. It's because we have a music frame on the page, and theoretically you could have more than one frame on a page, so what you're actually telling Dorico is move to the next frame, which also coincidentally in this case happens to be the next page as well. So you can make frame breaks. Now you'll also see down here, now this part is now 96.9% full, which is this page, the number of systems and spaces, and this one is only 76.6% full. So obviously Dorico is also telling you at this point if pages are over full, depending on how much you've squished into it, how much you've moved out. So now you know you can add frame breaks, you can add system breaks. I would just use these to move to previous, move to next, just to kind of to move little things around if you need to, especially on the score. If you're laying out the score, these two buttons, move to next and previous system, are actually going to sort out your frame breaks, because the next system is the next page anyway. So those can be very useful as well. So you can manually move things around on those if you need to. Now we now get to a slightly tricky thing that I've been asked a few times from people. When I'm laying out the score and I've got a score like this with multiple systems, why is there a big gap in the middle? And what do we do about it? Also, what are the gaps between all of these systems, and how do we change those? Now you can see when you're in this tool over here on the left, the staff spacing, you can see that you've got, at the moment, I've got consistent gaps, because these are blank staves anyway. And even down here, in fact, we move to something with music on, they're fairly consistent spacing between all of these. We've got 14mm here, we've got 10.5 here, we've got 14 here. So this is because in our layout options, I've stopped using the library menu now, I'm just using the shortcut. In the vertical spacing section, we have these gaps at the top. So we have a staff to staff gap of 6 spaces, which is this here. And we know that because I'm using all the defaults at the moment, a space is 1.75mm, 6 times 1.75 is 10.5. I'll save you doing the maths. It's maths with an S. If this one here is a staff group, because it's got a bracket, to a staff or another staff group, which is 8. Well, in fact, it's this particular one, isn't it? It's staff group to staff group, so it's 8 spaces. 8 times 1.75 is 14. So therefore, we've got 14mm here. So that's why we're getting these consistent spacing and gaps between these. If you wanted to change any of these, just come here and change the number of spaces here, and it will then automatically change this one here. You don't have to drag things around. It will just do it, and it will then do it consistently across all of the pages. You also have an inter-system gap. So here it says 10 spaces, and 10 times 1.75 is not 83.5. Oops. So the reason for that is that if you keep scrolling down here, and we do have automatic collisions on for the score, even if we don't have them for the parts, do leave them on for the score. But there's a vertical justification happening, and there are two options here that I think confuse people as what's going on. Only one of these will apply at any one time. You're either using the top one or you're using the bottom one. I'm going to set these to 100 and show you what happens if you turn them off and why you don't want to turn them off. So I set them both to 100. I'll press apply. I'm just going to press close so we can see what is now going on this page. So what we have on this page now, in fact on every page, is we have a really big gap at the bottom instead. So we did have a big gap in the middle, and now we've got a really big gap at the bottom, which isn't what you want. So you could say, well, I want a bigger gap between the systems, the inter-system gap. So you could make this 20 instead of 10. So now what you've got is a slightly bigger gap here and a smaller gap here. So you could keep going and you could say, I'll make it 30. I'm just doing this off the screen for a second. So now I've got a gap here, and well, maybe that's what you wanted, maybe. So let's look at some other options as well. So let's put this back to 10. So we're back at all the defaults. Let's move down to this justification section. And we're going to say justify the distance only between the systems, because we have two systems here. So justify the distance between the systems when the frame is 100% full. I'm going to reduce this. What do you reduce it to? So this is where these numbers at the bottom of the page are really useful. So 82.8. So anything bigger than 80. So I'm going to say 80. Sorry, I'm going to say 80 in here. I'm going to say apply. I'm going to say close. So now, anything bigger than 80, which these pages are, it's going to justify them, which means it's going to spread the two systems out so that they meet the top and the bottom of the page. It does mean, though, that they now get a big gap in the middle that you might not want. So instead of this one only justifying the systems, maybe you also want to spread out the staves a bit. Maybe there's more space. Why don't you just take up more space? So you, instead of this one, I'll put this to 100 just to get it out of the way for a minute, we'll set this one to 80. So when you reach the 80% point on the page, justify the staves as well. Spread the staves out as well as spreading the systems out to meet the page. And then press apply and close, and now we get this. So now everything is spread out on the page. And then you're saying, but now maybe I want to see more clearly in the middle. Well, okay. So that's where you can also still use this that we reset back to 10. I'll set this to 20. So now we've set this to 20. We've now got a slightly bigger gap in the middle. So maybe this is what you want. So there's all sorts of options here, but I just need to explain kind of where all of these are and how you use them. So now Dorico is spreading these systems out on the page so they meet the top and they meet the bottom of the page, and all of the staves it's spreading out slightly so that it's using up more of the space but still allowing that gap that you were set in the middle. So if you go here to your kind of measurement-y tool, then here we've got a set gap in the middle, and all of these, instead of being 10.5 and 14, have spread out a bit. They're 13.5 and 18. They're spreading out consistently, but they're all spread out a bit. So that's how you can kind of balance what's on the page. And you can see down here, now this page is 87.5% full. So you can decide at what point you want these kind of things to happen. So for example, if I just move myself out of the way again, down here we have an 83.8. So you could, for example, say that this one should happen when it gets above 90. So we've got an 80% and a 90%. So these pages are 80 and this one's above 90. So if I apply this, these staves are all slightly closer together now with a bigger gap in the middle, and these ones are all spread out because I'm now using these two options in different ways. So as I said, each page will only use one of these options. It will either do the systems and the staves and spread them out, or it would only do the systems. So you can change these depending on the style of music you have, how many systems you have, and of course all of this needs to happen after you've decided, do you have hide empty staves on? What's the size of the staff? What's the paper size and everything else? This is why I'm showing you things this way around. So the defaults here is 60 here and 80 here, but you can set them for your project. I'm going to put this to 100 because I don't want to use it. You can set these to be whatever you want to use for your project to get the perfect layout that you want to set for your particular option. Now, you can manually move things. You shouldn't, but you can. Oh, sorry, one last thing on this one. If you want to show system dividers, there's an option in here, layout options, staves and systems for system dividers, and you can turn these on, which means you will also get these little system dividers if you want them. They're not on by default, I don't think, but you can turn them on should you want them, if that makes it clearer where your systems are. There's also some options for when they apply, so minimum number of staves, or the size, or, you know, those kind of things. When the number of players change, you know, there's various other options for them. Now, I know that people have been manually dragging things around, and I'll show you how you do it and why I don't want to sometimes. So there is an option up here. So I'm in this system, so the staff spacing tool over here to move systems. This section here, this bar at the top here, I can drag this one here, and it's going to move the entire system up and down. It's not changing the spacing of the things in the system, it's just moving the entire system up and down. Now, the reason these exist is right at the end of the project. Once you've done all the automatic layout and everything looks actually very pretty, one page might need a little bit more spacing or adjusting for some reason. That's why these options exist. They don't exist so that you can, you know, so that you have to drag things around manually. It's going to take you much longer if you do it that way. So this, you can drag the system. I can also, there's a little drag handle here, I can move an individual staff here if I need a little bit more spacing. So maybe there's a case where, I don't know, this slur and this triplet are slightly too close together and you need a little bit more space. Maybe you need to put something else underneath and you need to push them together just slightly to make a little bit more space. Now, you can then see at any point when you're back in this tool here where these red areas are, and later on, if you needed to remove them, you can choose these little red sections, you can just press delete, and Dorico will jump back to wherever the default spacing options are so that you can easily change them. If you've made lots and lots of changes, in the engrave menu you can format the music frames and you can reset a layout completely. There's a staff spacing option and you can reset a layout, or you can just reset selected frames or selected systems. So there are options in here. The similar applies for note spacing. If you need to reset some note spacing, there are options in there as well. So if you're in a part, what I've seen happen sometimes is people have moved, and actually there's very little difference between this system one and this staff one, because a system is a staff because it's just a part. But you know, if you've moved individual items around here to make a bit more. Now, you can do that if you want to, but really it's a last resort at the end of a project just to make a bit of space to make something else fit. But I want to show you a couple of other reasons why you wouldn't want to do that, and how you can get consistent layouts as well. There are also, if you want them, when you've got hold of one of these items here and you're dragging it, if you hold down Alt or Option, you can concertina drag effectively, which has made all of these now get spaced closer together, and you can drag this one and concertina drag up like this, and you can make more space here. Now, there's very rare that you actually need to do this, really, and this is where I probably would use one of these reset options, like, you know, reset this layout or this page, because you really don't need to drag the staves around very much. Also, don't drag the staves to get this one onto the next page. If you're saying this one here, I want to drag it down a bit until I reach some sort of limit and then it will appear on this page, it never will. In fact, in some cases you can drag it off the page entirely, so you really don't want to drag things around. I'm just going to press delete and delete that change. But dragging them down off the page will not move them to the next page. That's where you just want to add a system or a frame break. You know, you just want to select whichever one that was. Was it this one? And you just want to press Shift F and add a frame break, and it will move it to the next page. You know, really don't want to drag them. You can. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just checking all the notes I've made. I'll show you a case where that's happened, how you want to reset it and everything else. But let's say we've finished a layout. This violin layout here. Let's say, no, this isn't going to work either. But anyway, we'll use this one. Let's say you've finished a layout. You've got everything exactly as you want it for one layout. Let's say it's horn 1. And now you've got horns 2, 3, and 4. You don't necessarily want to have to make all of the same changes to horns 2, 3, and 4, especially if they're basically playing the same rhythmic material, just with some different notes. You want all of the same sizes, spacing, page formatting, page breaks, and all those kind of things are the same. So if you go to setup mode, on the right hand side, you would choose, let's call this horn 1, I know it says violin. You would choose that layout and right click, and you can go to propagate part formatting, and then you can copy the formatting from one instrument to one or more other instruments. I'm not going to do more than one, but you can, if you hold down Command or Control, you can select others. So I'm going to copy all the formatting from violin 1 to violin 2, including, in my case, the layout options and all the system formatting. You might want that, you might not. I'll press OK. So now what it's done is it's applied a whole load of system breaks to make sure the formatting is exactly the same between violin 1 and violin 2. And then you realise you really didn't want to do that because this part is actually quite different. But if they were similar horn parts or similar other instrumental parts, that's a case where you might want to do that so that you've then copied all of the formatting from one format to the other, one layout to the other. And then when you didn't want it, you can just go engrave and go to here, and you can say, actually reset this layout please, and now we're all back to where we should be, because this one is going to need some slightly different formatting and options. I've also been asked in some previous questions, how do I turn on multirests? In the full score you won't get multirests by default because we're presuming you don't want them. In all of the parts, you will get multirests. If you're doing an individual part in this project, you've started a new project, you've added one instrument, you're writing some notes, and then you're going to use that as a part, I'd actually switch to the part, because then the multirests will be on automatically, the label will be correct in the top corner, those kind of things. But if you need them, in layout options, you can go to players, and you can go to bar rests and multi-bar rests, and you can decide whether to consolidate bar rests or not. So if I choose that one, then it will turn the multi-rests off in this part, or you can turn them on. You can also consolidate bar repeats if you're using bar repeats for that style of music. And if you have bar rests and you don't want to show the bar rests, you can also turn those off. But in most cases, you'll probably want them turned on. But this is where you can turn on and off multi-bar rests for one or more of the layouts that you have selected if you want them. So I just thought, while we were looking at those. Now, I've got a project that somebody sent me in. Thank you very much, Marcel, for sending me this. I have made a couple of tweaks to this project. So you can't say, oh, Marcel, why did you do that? Because I might have changed some things in this project. But there was a couple of particular things that was really good that he sent me in this project that I could say, this is how you want to do it. The first is in the score. When you've got rehearsal marks and text at the same time, sometimes they'll get in the way of each other. If it's in the score, one of the items, or in fact all of the parts actually, one of the things I would often check is in library engraving options. For this style of music, rehearsal marks section has an option, I've scrolled down a bit, has an option here to position rehearsal marks at the start of the system. So instead of being over the top of the music, it will move them and left align it with the systemic bar line. So if I apply that and press close, then for all of the parts in the score in this project, this rehearsal mark, Willow's joining in again, apologies. This rehearsal mark will now be aligned with this systemic bar line here. So that'll be the same for all the parts as well, but it just means it gets it out of the way. Now it only happens at the beginning here, of course. Willow! I give up. I give up. Anyway, so it only happens when the rehearsal mark is at the beginning of the system here, but it can be an initial really useful thing. The other thing was, he said, here's a saxophone part, for example, and he has changed some of the things on the template. So you can see, actually, let's have a quick look. In the engrave mode here, his first page template has a little graphic. There's a little graphic up here. It's got project, composer and arranger and a subtitle. He's moved the copyright over here. He's made some changes to this. Great. But he wants a consistent staff gaps between everything. And these rehearsal marks are getting in the way and causing problems. So I then thought, well, actually, this one doesn't look terrible. I mean, D probably wants to be a little bit higher. But this one, it doesn't look terrible. So I was thinking initially, what's going on? When I go to this option here, which is with the one we just used, this is the staff spacing tool, you can see there's loads of red things. So actually, loads of things have been manually dragged to put them into place. And he's done that because the rehearsal marks and the text were causing problems. So I'm not going to destroy this saxophone part. What I'm going to do is, on the right-hand side down here, I'm going to make a new part, and I'm going to add the saxophone into it. So I'm making a new alto saxophone part, and I'm just going to double-click over here, and I'm just going to say Alt. It's an alternate part that I'm just making. So now from my drop-down list, I can choose alto saxophone Alt. So this is the default layout that Dorico was doing, and was not what Marcel wanted. Now the reason for that is in engrave mode here. When you look at the spacing, they're fairly consistent, spacings between all of these, but they're all potentially a bit big. And the rehearsal marks are often stuck up in the air. So all the rehearsal marks are up here. And they're banging into the text. So there's a couple of things I would do. One is, we discussed it a little bit earlier, I would go to vertical spacing, and I would turn off the collision avoidance. And you see everything's got a little bit tighter. So by turning off the collision avoidance, now the rehearsal marks are getting too close to the staff above, but they aren't affecting the spacing. So in this spacing tool now, you can now see we're back down to 19.4 now. And we've got a little bit more on the page. So we've got more on the page, and the spacing is being affected less by those things because we've turned off that collision avoidance. And then what I would do is I would select a rehearsal mark and move it. In this particular case, I'm going to press Ctrl-Shift-A once, which is select more, which is going to select all of these rehearsal marks. That one's probably okay, actually. So I'll just Control select that one. So now I've got all of these selected. Now when I move one, they'll all move. So I'm just dragging them down with the mouse and positioning them so they're all roughly in the right place. I can still manually tweak one or two if I want to. But now these rehearsal marks are not affecting the space between the staves because I've turned it off in the collision avoidance off in the layout options. And now I've got more consistent spacing between all the staves in a much quicker way. Because if I would probably, for this style of music, I would select all the parts and I would turn off the collision avoidance for all of them. And then in each part, I'd just make sure the rehearsal marks are in the right place. And if a rehearsal mark also happened to be at the beginning of a line, so let's say we put a system break in, then this one I wouldn't need to move because it would automatically now be aligned with the systemic bar line because of the change I made in engraving options. I just press undo a couple of times. So I'm back here. So those are the kind of little tweaks I would make. One in layout options for all the parts, because then I don't have to do it for them all individually, and just maybe then to manually move a few little items if they're affecting that staff spacing when the alignment options are on. The other one is, and this was something Lily mentioned to me as well as a useful thing to highlight. Lily, who writes our manual. Can I find a suitable place to do this, though? This will be the question. No, I will just add it somewhere. Let's do here. So in one of these parts over here, it doesn't really matter. It really doesn't matter. So let's say in this bar here. So let's say there are items in the staff which are forcing things apart. So let's say it's a line. It could be text. It could be, there's a few things that will do this. In fact, let's do a text one as well. So let's do text first. So I'll say over here, we've added some text to say something. I'm going to put it on a couple of lines so that it really affects things in a way that we don't want to happen. So this text, because generally on the score, I do want collision avoidance on, I think. Maybe you don't, but I do want it on. But this is adding too much space between these two systems. So what you can then do is, I would probably edit this text anyway, but even if it's on one line, it's going to be adding a little bit more space between these two staves that maybe I don't want. So this text, in the properties panel, there's a few items that you can do with this, but if you go to engrave mode, you get a few more items that you can do with it, including you can toggle the avoid collisions. So you can see now that's the difference that text is making. So maybe I actually just want to position this now so that it fits. Maybe I also want to erase background so that it erases the background of that line. But this is now not affecting the system spacing. It's not pushing everything else on the page just because of this little bit of text. So, this is the avoid collisions on, avoid collisions off, or off that way. So, and the reason it has a toggle and a switch is the toggle is it following the global rules or not, and then this is the little override. So avoid collisions is now off. So those kind of things can sometimes make a difference for little text items to say that's affecting my spacing. In engrave mode, use the properties panel and change that option. But also sometimes you'll find things like these lines or other items, and this line here is now adding a bit of space in here that I don't want it to. But there isn't an option, even in engrave mode, there isn't an option to avoid collisions for this line. So here's a little option, which is if you press F to flip it, then it's flipped it below the staff, and you can see it's now got options for above, below, and inside the staff. It's changing this property. So F, flipping it, it's the same as flipping stems. If you press F, it will flip a stem. But this item here is flipping which side of the staff it's on. So if I press F, it's setting the placement to below. It's removed the spacing from here, but now I'm in engrave mode, I can manually position this here. So now it's manually positioned above, even though the placement is below. And occasionally, that's a really useful way to get space back. There was already a bit of extra space down here, so I flipped it to that side of the staff. It's made no difference to the spacing, and then I can manually drag it back to where I want it to be. So that can potentially also be, a neat little option for getting some space back. I think that's all of the things that I kind of thought was suitable for this session, but I'm just going to quickly check in the comments to see if there's anything else that I've missed as well. So just bear with me a second. There's been quite a few comments here, and I know that I can see that Daniel has been answering some of these, so I'm going to presume that we're not too bad. That one's been answered. That's been answered. Oh, brilliant. A lot of these things have been answered already, so I don't think I need to do any of those. Linda, the vertical spacing settings don't always seem to work even after turning off a vertical justification. Not sure what I'm doing wrong. I think, yes, as Daniel said, send me an example file, and then I'll have a look. I get a lot of emails, but I will have a look, and then can let you know. So discover Dorico discover Dorico is all one word. Discover Dorico at steinberg.de, and then I'll have a look at that. Somebody else has also just asked similarly about asking questions and that kind of thing. So yes. If you want to email me a question with a specific project, that'd be great. Send me the project file. A graphic doesn't always tell us exactly what's going on, So yeah, send me a project file and we'll have a look. And if you need a multi-rest in the score, yes, well, you can turn on multi-rests, so you can turn them on for the score as well if you want to. Any plans to make this to galley view also? I'm not sure exactly what that was referencing. We haven't talked very much about things like staff text and system text, because somebody's just asked about verses and choruses and that kind of thing. So Shift-X that I was using just for text is one item of text, but Shift-Alt-X, while it looks similar, could be things like verse. I would probably make a paragraph style for it, really, but that's staff. So that's system text, so it applies to all of the instruments, as opposed to staff text that just applies to one instrument. So this will now appear in all of the parts, and will affect spacing in different ways, of course, because it only appears once in the score, but it also appears in all of the other parts. So they can make a difference as well. But yes, if there's questions about anything else on and layouts, I think there may be some specific things about that we haven't covered in this one. For example, the way if you have condensing turned on. So if you're doing a score like this, This one's okay because it's not got duplicates of instruments. But if you have 2 flutes and 2 clarinets and 4 horns, then before you do any of the spacing options and and laying out things and setting sizes of things, you want to use edit condensing, which also leads me on to, well, maybe another useful Discover Dorico session would be on kind of condensing options and why things condense in particular ways. So if that would be useful, maybe send me some examples again, because I've seen some also on Facebook and on our forum recently of people saying, why is this condensing in this particular way? Maybe we should do a Discover session on that kind of thing again, and we can look at how things are condensed and why. But yes, let me know what would be useful in another session. Petri says, I mean individual staff spacing in galley view. Yeah, we don't do that at the moment because the spacing all takes quite a lot of work to figure out. And there isn't a page in galley view, it's just a space with all the staves in. So at the moment, I would just use this vertical spacing option and just increase the galley view ideal staff gaps and make this 175 or 200%. Just increase the gaps between all of the staves, and that normally actually gives you what you need. And like I said, also with the instrument filters. So if you Google Dorico instrument filters, then it will explain about kind of setting some of those. So if you're only working on the strings or only working on a particular set of instruments, you don't need to be looking at all of them. You can just work on those particular set of instruments, and that will also help as well. We already have a yes to do a session on condensing. Creating symbols in the symbol menu, yes, that could be an option. Linda, do you want to send me some examples of the kind of symbols and things that you need to be able to create? We could also potentially, if we're doing those and if we're making things as playing techniques, then you can also make them play back in a lot of cases as well. So it depends what the symbols are and the cases you want. But yes, if you have other ideas for other sessions that you'd like, please also email me, discoverdorico@steinberg.de. So I think there's not too many questions about this particular topic. So email me if you have other questions about things and other ideas of topics. And yes, if there's anything on this topic that I haven't covered, or you've got a particular case of something, then you can also email me and let me know, and we can help you create your perfect layout. I would say, actually, the very last thing, in engraved mode, we talked about page templates. So I've been editing these page templates in some cases and adding areas that I want and that kind of thing. You then have a couple of options at the end. There are page template sets at the bottom down here. You can export your page template set and import them into another project. So if you've changed your full score or part or both, you can then export that as a file and you can import it into another project, so that the changes you're making to your template and setting up the template that you've got, or if you're sharing it with somebody else, they can then import it into an existing project. Or if you have a template that's been set up and has everything that you want in it, you can also go to the setup menu and you can remove the flow that's here, save as something else first. So go File, Save As, give it a different name first. Remove the flow from this project, and then you can go to File, Import Flows, and you can import another Dorico project into here, which will then have, of course, all the template options because it's already in this file. And of course, you also have Save as Project Template. So if you have a file set up with the settings and everything else you want in it, and that includes your engraving options and all sorts of other things, you can save that as a project template, and that project template will then appear in the hub, which is the thing that starts up when you first start Dorico, and you then choose the options that you want in here. In your Create New section, you can create your own template section in here, or add to one of ours and create your own templates to start off with. So as part of that efficiency, once you've made these kind of changes that you want to do, that's how you're going to get consistent layouts and consistent look between all of them. And if it's just particular fonts, sizes, spacing and those kind of things, and you want to selectively import some of those things between your projects, then use the library menu and use the export library. Well, export library would export this library to be used somewhere else, which might be useful, but also the library manager So export library would save all of the settings of the fonts and sizes and spacing that I've set for this project, but the library manager also lets you compare the current project you're working on either with factory settings, or if you drag another Dorico project that you've worked on into this box here, you can then do differences, and you can say what are the differences between the project I'm working on and another project I previously worked on, and you can selectively choose all of the options that you want. So you can just import certain sizes, certain fonts, certain settings that you've used in a project, and that again, as part of this, efficiency of getting to the end of the project quicker and getting the consistent results that you want, that can also be very useful. So there you go. Even Claude Lepalm has got a couple of extra tricks out of it, so it can't be bad. So yes, so thank you for joining live in this session, and let us know on the email if you've got any other questions. If you're going to be at NAMM, then come and say hello. I'll be in the Yamaha area, so it's top floor of somewhere, isn't it? Find Yamaha, you'll find me. And otherwise, I will see you online in one of these sessions very soon. Thank you for joining live.